I want to introduce to you all the way from Ashland, Oregon. Yes, so Karen Phelps is one of our furthest travelled speakers, and we really appreciate Karen and all the speakers who have travelled a very long distance to be here today. Karen has been involved with the Ancestral Health Society of the United States, which was our inspiration for setting up such a society here in New Zealand. So Karen's been probably unbeknownst to her, she's actually been a very big influence on this society and inspiring us to kind of take up the challenge and do a bit more here. So Karen's going to finish us off for the morning session on behavioural change, talking to us about signalling theory. Karen Phelps.
Thank you. This is my first ever presentation ever, actually, so we'll see how it goes. So this is a communication tower. I grew up in the desert southwest of the U.S., and it looks nothing like this. It is the opposite of this. No mountains, no trees. These are the tallest structures for miles around, and so sometimes at night, because it is such a desolate sort of place, you can stand and just spin and just see them on the horizon. Just as far as the eye can see, they have these red blinking lights on top. Growing up, these lodged in my memory, and they became symbolic for me. And I always wondered, what are they saying? Who are they talking to? Where are they going? Who's receiving them? So there we are. It's part of my inspiration for being a writer. Forward. All right. Okay, so I've been in ancestral health for about almost 5 years now, and I started noticing patterns. And this word, signal, I kept seeing it everywhere, and so we see it in several different places. Evolutionary biology in terms of sexual mate selection, and in humans this gets interesting. With males, we have health markers, facial symmetry, these sorts of things. Or we get toupees and fast cars, and I will get to the fast cars a little bit later. In anthropology, they're really interested in costly signaling theory, and this gets into altruism and whether that's something that actually happens or not, that individuals take on risks for the greater good. Economics, actually, Trent was just kind of talking about this with car sales. Another example being contract theory. If I'm applying for a job, the employer is hoping that I'm being honest on my resume. But as we know, that if I take the risk and I don't get busted lying on my resume, that I can actually perhaps make more money. So we get into honest and dishonest signaling in all of these. But I want to actually zoom out a little bit. So I kept seeing the word. What does it mean? So basic definition. Signal, an indicator, such as a gesture or colored light that serves as a means of communication. A message communicated by such means. Something that incites action. So, in general, we're talking about communication, just pure and simple. The type of signaling that really interests me is cell signaling. This is how a cell perceives and responds to its environment. This is how the magic happens for all of us. Errors in these communications, this is where you get your cancer, your heart disease, and autoimmunity. There are people probably sitting in this room who know a lot more about this than I do. I'm giving a very zoomed out perspective here. So when we talk about multicellular organisms, we're looking at 3 main channels. Everybody remember these. And these aren't perfect categories. Some of them, intermingle and that sort of thing. But in general, we're talking about hormones, neurotransmitters, and cytokines. This is a very cool photo, by the way. Signaling transduction actually happening in a house mouse, a cell in its hippocampus. I think it's cool. So for cell signaling, we have several modes. It is, of course, how a cell regulates itself internally. And then we have cell-to-cell signaling, cell-to-organism signaling, and organism-to-organism. As we get more complex, it starts to get more fuzzy. We know a lot more, I think, about intracellular and cell-to-cell than we do as we zoom further out. The communications, there's just that many more messages. So, as I mentioned, as we get more complex, it's kind of hard to describe. So, I'd like to make an argument that there's more communication going on than we're even really aware of. And this is actually a new area of research, like maybe 30 years, that we're starting to more fully understand and get actual data about how this is happening. And I apologize for the formatting here. Jamie made me use PowerPoint. I'm an Apple user, so hopefully it won't be too bad. So if anyone was at AHS 13 in Atlanta, was anybody there? And we saw God Sod speak, and he told us about his research and how you can take a man and put him in a Porsche, even if it's just rented, and his testosterone levels will go up after driving that car. We all know this intuitively, right? The cliche is true. It's actually true. And interestingly, there is more of a testosterone bump if he's in a city where people are seeing him versus if he's just on a deserted highway where nobody is seeing him. So consumerism acts on us as humans, as Trent also knows. Really fascinating research going on in Japan. Yoshifumi Miyazaki is researching, getting actual data about how nature therapy is very important for humans. You know, Japan, he takes this work very seriously. They have a very high suicide rate. I think they're third in the world, and there's a lot of urban pressure. So there are nature reserves where people take buses and they get off and they nature bathe, basically, and they check for markers like blood pressure and cortisol levels. All right, what's next? Here's Bobo. Bobo the rabbit. So like I said, a lot of this is intuitive, but just to give a nutshell example, this is Bobo. He's a wild rabbit. This is his home. It's his little burrow. And in this environment, he has to compete for food. He has to compete for mates. He has to be constantly aware of predators. So we're going to expect a certain set of behaviors. We're going to put Bobo in a cage now. And we're going to give him everything we think he wants. We're going to give him specially formulated pellets and water, and we're going to pick his mates for him because we want certain traits, maybe softer hair, and he might get tortured by a toddler, which would produce certain behaviors. We're going to be really mean now. We're going to put Bobo in a box of nails. No food, no water, no socialization whatsoever. We're going to expect a different set of behaviors. Am I scaring anybody yet? So, if I had to wager a guess, if you had to describe your life in terms of one of these 3 slides, I'm hoping most of us would probably say this. I don't think any of us are doing this. Maybe we aspire to this a little bit more, but chances are no. I hope most of us are here. Do not raise your hand if you're here. That's just sad. But we'll talk about it. Something that's been really helpful for me to think about is that we're a human being on Earth, and there are these things happening to us. We're a permeable membrane almost. But it's important to remember that we do have some measure of control. We like to talk about our environment as acting on us, as though we're hapless victims, but really we have our own motivations and agendas. So if we think of things in terms of inputs, and this is not an exhaustive list, but we have our diet and nutrition, our fitness and our movement, stress levels, sleep, sunlight, those are all signals coming inward, and then something magical happens internally and results in our outputs, which might be our physical energy, your mental capacity, mood, health, your strength, and your movement quality. Then there's a really fun category of in and outputs, and that is not pun intended, but sex is one of the best examples. And relationships, we get certain inputs and signals, and then we send them out as well. Before I forget, so in the same way that cells communicate in multicellular organisms in those 3 categories, do we remember what they were? Hormones, cytokines, neurotransmitters. Those are the 3 same channels that things are interacting with us. And I think when we're in ancestral health, in fact, I would almost wager a bet that every talk that I've ever heard maybe at Ancestral Health symposiums, and that we will probably hear this weekend. All of them touch on those 3 channels in some way. And modern humans are probably a mess on at least one, if not all of them, to some degree. So that's what we're talking about. So why signaling? Again, I'm a word technician, I'm a writer. I like it for a few reasons. It's neutral. It removes morality and opinion. Andrew was talking about this in his talk, of how the orthorexia and what was it, that wonderful word, biomasochism? Yes, lovely. Or, if you're paleo and you get in an argument with a vegan, morality is bound to come up, right? But what if we could know what our cells needed at any given moment? That's not a moral issue, that's objective, right? If we're feeding ourselves properly, there's no more room for it. Oops, there we go. Customization. So for a signal to be received, it has to fit. It has to be received in a certain way. So we can send out signals, but not everyone is going to receive the signal, or if they do, it might not be received in the same way for everybody. So this allows for customization. All of us in here probably have a reaction to gluten. It may not be the same reaction, right? You could have, rheumatoid arthritis or migraines or weight gain. So all of us, this gives us a chance to say, hey, this works for me, this doesn't work for me, and this is the result I got. It's holistic. It zooms out to recognize, again, as Andrew was mentioning, that we're interconnected. You can't separate the parts from the whole. And that I think that we have a culture that kind of tells us that we as individuals, we're lazy. We're not making good choices, everything in moderation, right? And they're not taking responsibility for their role in our environment. That's great, now what? So what's the opposite of a signal? Static, noise. So how do we go about, getting rid of all the static so that we can figure out what it is that we need to do? I have nothing new to tell you. This is what we already know. And there's many good systems out there to help us, remind ourselves that these are the things to do. How many of us feel like we have diet and nutrition dialed in? Fitness? People feeling good about that? Chances are there's something on this list that you can work on. Keep going. We can find something else to work on if you're bored with the first 2. We talk a lot about those, but there's plenty of other things to go on about. These are just some entry points that have been helpful for me. These are not perfect by any means. There's some disagreement about some of them, but so we'll start with, we've got Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If the base of your pyramid is, if you're not breathing, for example, chances are you need to fix that before you think about your self-esteem. Over there we have our Myers-Briggs profiles. I don't know if it's much better than astrology, but it's a starting point, right? And actually learning that I was an introvert, and Jimmy and I have had numerous conversations about that was actually really helpful for me in determining my needs and the needs of others. In the middle here, we have our parasympathetic and our sympathetic nervous systems. How many people will confess to eating a meal while driving or working at your desk recently? Don't do that. That's bad. So learn your parasympathetic and your sympathetic, how everything you do affects those 2 systems, and to get a more optimal experience out of your meal. So down here at the bottom, I don't know if you've come across this. Bronnie Ware is an Australian nurse who worked with dying patients, and she had all these stories that she collected, and she found that there were top 5 regrets of the dying. And so consider these a message from your future self about where to put your energies with your life. Number 5, I wish I had let myself be happier. I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. I wished I'd had the courage to express my feelings. I wish I didn't work so hard. I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself. So these are where we can put our energies for good. That's heavy. So what I want us to consider is to start thinking more in terms of a human ecology, not forget that even though our environments look artificial and what we call man-made, they are still our habitat, and it's interacting with us, we're interacting with it. We have a choice. You have a right, actually. You have my permission to define that habitat, to build it up for success, for the choices that you need to make. It's complicated. Just to eat healthy, it takes a lot of effort. Your colleagues make fun of you. Your family might complain that they miss the pasta or the bread. Keep going. This is the right thing to do. Tune in. Listen to your own personal frequency. We talk a lot about hyperstimulus in ancestral health. And the more I think about it, I can't think of a single hyperstimulus that doesn't benefit somebody financially. So whether we're talking about junk food and beverages, junk entertainment, or something like pornography, those things all benefit somebody for your downfall. Why do you do that? Don't do that. Tune in, listen internally. And the last one, signals are contagious, whether they're good or bad ones. So when you're able to tune in, to touch into yourself, to what's authentic, and you can broadcast that to others, you give others permission to make the decisions they need to make to have a healthy life. And how many people are in this room, Jamie? Do you have a sense? 135. So we have no way of knowing how many people we can all affect in this room. And even the ones that are resistant, you never know what seed you're going to plant and when that might grow. I've received messages from people months after the fact of having a conversation. And they thank me later, even though they were maybe combative or resistant at the time. So all of us in here have a lot of influence. So I ask, what signals are you receiving? What signals are you sending, and what signals do you want to send to the world? Let's go make that happen moving forward. Thank you.